The rain came harder than the forecast ever promised. It wasn't a drizzle or a cleansing kind of downpour. It was relentless. The kind that soaked through clothes, skin, and whatever fragments of dignity you still had left. I didn't have an umbrella, just a crumpled termination letter in my back pocket, and a voicemail from someone who swore they loved me. Right before they stopped answering altogether. I'd been walking for hours without purpose. The city lights blurred through the curtain of rain, smeared halos of white and amber. Every step sounded hollow against the pavement, like I was walking inside a memory instead of the real world. When I finally stopped, I was standing across from Rowan's Cafe, my usual spot when life was still manageable. The sign was dark now, chairs stacked inside, rain pooling under the awning. I sat down on the bench out front, water dripping from my hair, my jacket heavy and cold. I didn't even try to shield my face anymore. What was the point? There was no one left to see. I pressed my hands together, shaking. The breakup had been weeks ago, but tonight it felt final. Like the universe had drawn a line through everything I used to be. I lost my job that morning, packed my things into a cardboard box by noon, and found out by evening that my ex had moved on with someone else. "You'll find someone better," he'd said once, back when we still believed words could fix what actions broke. The street was quiet except for the rain and the occasional hiss of tires. Neon signs flickered from the closed pharmacy across the road, painting the puddles pink and blue. I could taste salt on my lips. Tears or rain, I couldn't tell anymore. My whole body trembled from the cold and the weight of it all. That's when I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate. Someone was approaching from behind, their shadow stretching in the glow of a street lamp. "Hey!" The voice was deep, calm. Not intrusive, just there. I looked up, blinking through the rain. A man stood under an umbrella, the water sliding off its edges in rhythmic trails. He wasn't dressed for the weather. Dark sweater, jeans, hair slightly damp from before he'd opened the umbrella. His expression wasn't pitying, just steady, like he'd seen storms before and didn't fear them. "You okay?" he asked quietly. It was such a simple question that I almost laughed. "Okay." No, I wasn't. But the words wouldn't come out, only a shaky breath that fogged the air. He seemed to understand. Instead of leaving, he stepped closer, angled the umbrella to cover me too. The sound of rain softened immediately. That small patch of silence felt almost sacred. "I'll stay till you're ready," he said. Something about the way he said it, not as an offer, but as a quiet truth, made my throat tighten. I turned away, embarrassed by my tears. "You don't have to," I murmured. "I know." He sat down beside me anyway, the umbrella tilted between us, shoulders barely touching. For a while, neither of us spoke. The world shrank to the sound of rain on canvas and the faint hum of streetlights. From the corner of my eye, I studied him, late 30s, maybe early 40s. A bit of stubble, strong jaw, eyes that caught light even in the gloom. There was a calmness to him that didn't feel forced. The kind of stillness that comes from surviving something of your own. He had a paper bag in one hand, the kind cafes use for pastries. He set it down between us. "I was closing up when I saw you," he said, voice soft. "Didn't want to just walk by." "You work at the cafe?" I asked, though my voice cracked. "Own it, actually." He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that didn't demand one back. "Evan." I nodded, my name getting stuck halfway up my throat. "Luca." He didn't press for details, didn't ask why I was out here, what happened, or why I looked like someone the rain had forgotten. He just sat there, holding the umbrella, eyes focused on the wet street like he was guarding the silence between us. A car passed slowly, headlights reflecting in the puddles. The world outside our small circle of shelter looked blurred and unreal, but for once, that felt like mercy. "Rough night?" he asked finally. I let out a sound that was half a laugh, half a sob. "Something like that." He nodded once, like he understood without needing proof. He reached into the paper bag and pulled out a napkin, offering it wordlessly. It was damp at the edges but dry enough to feel human. "Here. For now," he said. I took it, pressing it against my face. My hands were trembling so hard I almost dropped it. "Thanks." I whispered. Don't mention it. More silence followed. I wanted to fill it with explanations, with the whole pathetic story, how I trusted someone who made me feel small, how I'd built my life around someone who was already looking past me. But words felt useless in that moment. He didn't need my history. He was giving me something better, presence. After a few minutes, I realized I wasn't shaking as much. The rain had eased a little, turning into a soft drizzle. Evan adjusted the umbrella again, glancing at me. You're soaked through. You'll catch something. I'll be fine, I lied. He stood and extended a hand. Come on. My place is right there. You can dry off, warm up. I hesitated. Every instinct told me not to trust strangers, not after the year I'd had. But his eyes were steady, patient, the kind that didn't demand trust but earned it slowly. I don't want to. You're not a bother, he interrupted gently. You just look like someone who needs a dry towel and maybe a little quiet. Something broke inside me. Not painfully this time, but like ice cracking under the first touch of sunlight. I stood, the bench leaving a wet imprint on my jeans, and followed him. He kept the umbrella tilted more toward me than himself. The small gesture caught me off guard. It had been so long since anyone had done something without expecting anything in return. We walked a short block in silence. The rain clung to the air like a memory. I kept my gaze on the pavement, feeling strangely exposed and comforted at the same time. When we reached the corner, I saw the cafe again. Rowan's, faint glow now visible through the kitchen window. Evan unlocked the back door, flicked on a dim light, and gestured for me to come in. The warmth hit me instantly. The smell of coffee grounds, wood, and something faintly sweet. My clothes clung to me, dripping onto the tile floor. Sit, he said, pulling out a chair. He grabbed a clean towel from a rack and handed it over. Sorry, it's not much. It's perfect, I said, voice hoarse. He poured hot water into a mug, added something from a tin, and set it in front of me. Ginger tea. Helps with the cold. Steam rose between us, curling in the soft kitchen light. For a few minutes, the world felt still again, like maybe everything outside that door could wait. Evan leaned against the counter, arms crossed, watching me with quiet concern. You don't have to explain anything, he said after a while. Sometimes it's enough just to stop running for a bit. I nodded, staring into the tea. The warmth seeped into my hands, into my chest, into something deeper I thought had frozen over. Thank you, I whispered again. He smiled. You can crash here tonight if you need. The couch in the back's not much, but it's dry. I looked up. You sure? Yeah. The rain's not letting up anyway. I hesitated, then nodded. Okay. He turned off most of the lights, leaving only a small lamp near the counter. As I sat there, wrapped in the towel, listening to the softened rain on the roof, I felt something unfamiliar. Not joy, not yet, but safety. Before heading upstairs, Evan paused by the doorway and glanced back. I'll stay till you're ready, he said again, like a quiet promise carried over from the street. I didn't know why that line hit so hard, but it did. Maybe because no one had ever said it before. When the light finally faded from the room, I sat there in the quiet glow, the tea cooling slowly in my hands. The storm outside still raged, but inside, for the first time in months, I wasn't alone in it. And somehow that felt like the beginning of something I didn't yet have a name for. The hum of the heater filled the silence. It wasn't loud, just the steady kind of sound that feels like breathing. The storm outside kept tapping against the cafe windows, but the kitchen was a small island of warmth. Evan moved around quietly, methodical in a way that told me he was used to caring for things, coffee machines, tables, maybe people too. I sat near the counter, wrapped in the towel he'd handed me earlier, my wet clothes folded neatly over a chair to dry. Steam rose from the mug between my palms, carrying the smell of ginger and honey. You can hang those by the stove, he said, nodding toward my clothes. It'll dry faster. I hesitated. It's okay. I don't want to make a mess. He looked over his shoulder with that calm half-smile again. You'd have to try a lot harder than that. I almost smiled back but stopped myself. I didn't know how to act anymore, how to be in a space that wasn't filled with judgment or shouting. Everything inside me still braced for something sharp, some word or look that would remind me why I usually kept my guard up. Instead, Evan handed me a folded blanket and another dry towel. "You're shaking," he said softly. "Here. Thanks." My voice cracked again. I hated that. He didn't make a big deal out of it. Just went back to pouring himself a cup of coffee, his movements steady, patient. His hands were rough, working hands, but his tone stayed gentle. "You want some?" I shook my head. "I'd probably stay up all night." "Maybe that's not the worst thing," he said, settling across from me. "Storm like this, hard to sleep anyway." We sat in comfortable silence for a while. I could hear the rain hitting the roof, the faint rattle of wind against the vent. The cafe smelled like coffee grounds, soap, and faint vanilla from whatever pastries he'd baked earlier. "You live upstairs?" I asked. He nodded. "Yeah. Tiny apartment above the cafe. Saves rent and commute." "You?" I hesitated. "Nowhere, really. I was renting a room until last week." He didn't pry, just nodded again, the kind of response that said, "I'm listening, but only if you want to talk." That was rare. Most people I'd met in the last few years either demanded explanations or avoided eye contact altogether. Evan just let the quiet stretch comfortably between us. After a while, he said, "You look like someone who hasn't had a good meal in a while." I frowned. "You don't even know me." He smiled. "I've worked in hospitality for 15 years. I can tell when someone needs soup." I laughed, small but real. "That's specific." "Soup fixes more things than people think," he said, already pulling a pot from the shelf. "You'll see." He didn't ask what I liked. He didn't ask if I could pay him back. He just started cooking, chopping onions, stirring broth, moving with a quiet rhythm that made the space feel softer. I watched him, still unsure if I should leave, but every time I thought about standing up, the warmth and the smell kept me in the chair. When he handed me the bowl, I realized how hungry I actually was. The first spoonful burned a little, but the second was perfect. "This is good," I said. "Old recipe," he replied. "Used to make it when my ex got sick." The word ex hung in the air for a moment. I looked up, curious, but he didn't elaborate. Just sipped his coffee like the memory didn't hurt anymore, or maybe it did, but he'd made peace with it. We drifted into small talk. Music came up first. He liked old records, acoustic guitar, soft jazz at closing time. I told him about the bands I listened to when I couldn't sleep, half embarrassed by how many were just breakup playlists in disguise. He laughed lightly. "We've all been there." Then books. He was reading one by Steinbeck. I mentioned how I used to read in coffee shops just like this before life got messy. Every topic felt like testing thin ice, but it held. Nothing cracked. No judgment. Just two people talking because the night wouldn't end yet. At one point, I caught his gaze holding mine a second too long. Not in a way that scared me, but in a way that felt like being seen. I looked down quickly, pretending to focus on the spoon. He didn't push. After a while, I said quietly, "I don't really have a place to go tonight." He nodded, unsurprised. "You can stay here. There's a couch in the back office. It's not luxury, but it's dry and warm. I don't want to take your space." "You're not." He said it simply, like it wasn't up for debate. The firmness wasn't controlling, it was safe. I nodded, too tired to argue. He pointed toward the small hallway. "Towels are in the bathroom. You can shower if you want. I'll grab a pillow and blanket for you." Something in my chest loosened. "You don't have to do all this, Evan." He shrugged. "Maybe not. But I want to." There wasn't anything romantic in his tone. Not yet. It was care, the kind that doesn't expect return. That alone was disarming. The shower felt like a reset. The water was lukewarm and the light above flickered, but I hadn't felt clean in days. I could smell the faint scent of coffee and rain through the vent. When I stepped out, there was a folded shirt and sweatpants waiting on the counter. A little big for me, but soft and dry. Evan's voice came from the kitchen. "Figured you'd want something that isn't soaked." He'd stayed nearby, making sure I didn't need anything else. When I came out, he was sitting on a small armchair by the couch, flipping through a worn paperback. "You can crash here," he said, standing. I'll keep the light low. You want me to lock the door? Yeah, please. He nodded and turned the key gently. The rain outside grew softer now, more like a lullaby than a storm. I curled up on the couch, pulling the blanket over my shoulders. Evan didn't leave right away. He stayed in the chair across the room, reading quietly. Occasionally, he'd glance up to check if I was still awake. Can't sleep? He asked softly. I shook my head. Not used to quiet. He smiled faintly. You'll get used to it again. Something about the again hit me, like he believed peace wasn't lost forever. He eventually set his book aside and leaned back, eyes half closed. I thought he'd go upstairs to his own bed, but he didn't. He stayed right there, in that chair, keeping watch like some quiet guardian of the night. I lay there listening to the rain and his steady breathing. There was something grounding about it, knowing someone was still there, not out of obligation but out of choice. For years, I'd been surrounded by people who left the second I became inconvenient. Yet here was this man, a stranger, who stayed without asking anything in return. It made me ache in a different way, one I didn't know how to name. At some point, the exhaustion finally won. The last thing I remember before sleep was the flicker of the streetlight through the blinds and the faint hum of his breath, steady and calm, like he'd promised to stay until the storm, both outside and inside, passed. Morning arrived quietly. The rain had stopped. Pale sunlight filtered through the window blinds, casting gold stripes across the floor. The chair beside the couch was empty. For a brief moment I thought I'd imagined him, that maybe kindness like that didn't really exist. But then I saw it on the counter. A clean mug of coffee, still warm, a folded towel on top, and a small handwritten note beside it. Left early to restock supplies. Stay as long as you need. E. I read it twice, the simple words hitting harder than any speech could. No one had ever left me a note like that before. I wrapped my hands around the coffee mug, feeling the warmth seep into my fingers. The storm was gone, but the quiet he left behind stayed. Not empty, but full in a way I didn't understand yet. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like running. I didn't mean to stay another night, or the night after that. But somehow, days began to fold into each other, soft, unhurried, and full of quiet routines that felt safer than anything I'd known in a long time. Evan didn't ask how long I planned to stay, and I didn't ask if I should leave. He just handed me a clean mug each morning, poured coffee until the cup steamed, and talked about ordinary things, the weather, deliveries, what pastry sold out the fastest. The first morning, I offered to help. He shook his head, smiling. Guests don't work. By the third, I was wiping counters while he kneaded dough. He didn't stop me that time. The cafe opened early, and I found myself waking up to the smell of cinnamon and roasted beans. The sound of him humming drifted through the half-open door, low, tuneless, comforting. He had a habit of tapping the counter twice before pouring a drink, as if making a silent rhythm with the world. Outside, the rain had ended days ago, but the sky still carried that washed-out look, pale blue, fragile, open. Between customers, Evan and I shared small talk. Nothing deep, nothing loaded. But beneath it all, I could feel something shifting, an invisible thread pulling us closer with every glance and unspoken kindness. He never asked what happened before that night. I knew he was curious. You could see it in the way he paused sometimes, like he wanted to reach into the silence but respected the boundary around it. I broke that silence first. It was late one evening after he'd closed up. We were sitting on the back steps, mugs of tea in hand, the faint hum of traffic somewhere far away. The air smelled faintly of wet asphalt and coffee. You ever been with someone who made you feel smaller the longer you stayed? I asked suddenly. He didn't answer right away, just looked at me with quiet understanding, letting me decide if I wanted to keep going. My ex, I continued, eyes fixed on the street lamp across the road. He wasn't violent or anything, just dismissive, like everything I said was a punchline. I thought that was normal, teasing, right? Except after a while, I stopped recognizing myself in his house. I laughed less, talked less, apologized more. Evan nodded slowly, his gaze steady. I tried to leave 3 times, I said. Each time he made me feel guilty for it. Said no one else would deal with my moods. And I believed him. Until he left me for someone new. Someone easier to love, I guess. The words came out shakier than I wanted. But once they started, I couldn't stop. When he told me, I didn't even cry. Not then. I just packed my stuff, smiled, and wished him luck. I think I was too empty to feel anything. It wasn't until that night, when I saw his picture with someone else, laughing in the rain, that it all hit. Like my body remembered how to feel before my mind did. I exhaled, long and shaky. That's why I was there. On that bench. I didn't know where else to go. The silence afterward wasn't uncomfortable. It was grounding. A space that held my words instead of swallowing them. Evan finally said, "You didn't deserve that." I almost laughed. "Everyone says that." "I don't say things I don't mean," he replied softly. The way he said it made me believe him. After a moment, he looked out into the street. "My story's not so different," he admitted. "I was with someone for 8 years. We built a life together, business, apartment, everything. Thought we'd grow old making coffee and arguing about furniture." A faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Turns out, love doesn't always leave at the same pace for both people." One day, I woke up and realized I'd been loving someone who'd already left months earlier. I watched him, surprised by the calm in his tone. "How do you make peace with that?" He shrugged. "You don't. You just learn to live without the echo of it. You fill your days with something that matters, even if it's just a warm meal or a clean counter. You build quiet until it feels like home again." Something in his words sank deep, anchoring itself where the grief used to live. We didn't speak much after that. He reached out once. Not to touch, just to brush away a mosquito from my sleeve. But the gesture carried weight. The kind of gentleness that makes you realize how starved you've been for kindness. That night, I slept lighter but deeper. The next few days felt like a slow return to life. We fell into rhythm. I'd sweep the floor while he prepped pastries, wash mugs while he arranged flowers on tables. The radio played softly in the background, mostly old soul songs or acoustic covers. He never corrected me when I made mistakes, just smiled and showed me a better way to do it. "Gentle with the cups," he'd say. "They've survived a lot of mornings." So had I thought. At lunch, we'd sit by the window, sharing sandwiches. He always offered half even when I said I wasn't hungry. I think he knew I still skipped meals out of habit from when I had to stretch every paycheck. Sometimes customers would assume we'd known each other for years. "You two make a good team," one woman said, smiling as she left a tip. Evan just chuckled. "Guess we do." I tried not to think about how that made my chest tighten in an unfamiliar, almost hopeful way. One evening, after closing, we watched a movie on his small laptop. The couch was barely wide enough for two, so our shoulders brushed from time to time. Each touch felt like a spark I pretended not to notice. Halfway through, I realized I wasn't watching the film at all, just the reflection of the light flickering across his face. He noticed me looking once and smiled, small and knowing. "You're quiet," he said. "I'm thinking," I replied. "About nothing useful." He didn't press, just leaned back, arms crossed loosely, eyes back on the screen. But I caught the faintest blush rise along his jawline. Later, when the credits rolled, he stood to make tea. I offered to help, but he waved me off. "You'll burn yourself," he teased. "I'm not that hopeless." "Maybe not." He handed me the mug anyway. Our fingers brushed, barely, but it was enough to send a warmth through me that had nothing to do with the tea. We drank in silence, the room lit only by the soft glow from the laptop. I felt calm, not the kind that comes from distraction, but from safety. It hit me then. I was smiling. Not because someone expected me to, not because I was pretending things were fine, but because, for the first time in months, they actually were. I looked at him, the way he leaned against the counter, the faint creases at the corners of his eyes, the easy steadiness in his posture, and thought, this is what peace looks like. Evan caught my gaze, tilting his head. "What?" "Nothing," I said, smiling wider. "Just, thanks." "For what?" "For not asking me to be anything else." He looked at me for a long moment, eyes soft. You don't owe me gratitude, Luca. Just take care of yourself. That's enough. But it wasn't nothing. It was everything. That night, when I went to bed on the couch, I couldn't sleep right away. I listened to the faint sound of him moving upstairs. A floorboard creak, the click of a light switch. I wondered if he was lonely too, if he'd been waiting for someone who understood quiet the way I did. And though nothing was said, I knew something had changed. The space between us wasn't empty anymore. It was charged not with desire alone, but with recognition. Two people who'd broken differently, beginning to fit together in the places that once hurt the most. When sleep finally came, I dreamt of rain. Not the kind that drowns, but the kind that cleanses. The weather changed before I did. For weeks, the sun had filled every morning with the same golden stillness. The air warm enough to convince me that maybe things could stay that way. Then one afternoon, the wind picked up again. Sharp, restless, carrying the smell of rain. The sky darkened as if someone had turned a dimmer on the whole world. That's when I started pulling away. It wasn't deliberate. At least that's what I told myself. I just began finding excuses to be elsewhere, to take longer walks, to come in late after closing, to disappear upstairs when Evan tried to talk. He didn't call me out on it, but I could feel him noticing. He'd still greet me each morning with coffee, but there was a small hesitation now before he smiled. He didn't reach out as much, didn't stand as close. It was subtle, the way distance grows, not through arguments but through silence that used to feel safe and now felt careful. I told myself I was doing the right thing. I'd spent too long being someone's emotional crutch, the person who existed to make another feel better. I couldn't become that again. One night, while cleaning the back room, I found the umbrella from that first night, folded neatly and tucked behind the door. The black fabric was still damp at the edges, faintly smelling of rain and coffee. I stared at it for a long time. It was just an umbrella, but also the first thing that had shielded me when everything fell apart. The symbol of the moment he stayed. I should have felt grateful. Instead, my chest tightened, because the more I thought about that night, the more I realized how much I'd come to rely on his presence since then. On his voice, his steadiness, the way he looked at me like I wasn't broken beyond repair. And that terrified me. The rain finally came 2 days later, loud and heavy. The cafe emptied early. Customers rushed home clutching coats over their heads. I stayed behind, wiping tables long after closing. The thunder rolled above us, low and constant, like the world had a pulse again. Evan leaned against the counter, watching me quietly. You've been quiet lately. I kept my eyes on the cloth. Just tired. You were tired last week too. Guess I'm consistent. He didn't laugh, just crossed his arms. If you want to leave, you can. You don't have to stay out of guilt. That caught me off guard. I looked up, heart hammering. What? I'm not. He cut in gently. You've been here long enough to know I don't keep people who don't want to be here. That's not it. Then what is it? The question hit like a spotlight. There was no accusation in his tone, just quiet concern, which somehow made it harder to face. I dropped the cloth, pressing my palms against the table. You're easy to be around, I said finally. Too easy. And that scares me. He tilted his head slightly, brows drawn together. Scares you how? Because I'm starting to depend on it. On you. The words came out faster than I expected, almost desperate. I don't want to, I can't, turn you into another person I rely on just to feel okay. That's what I did before and it ruined me. I'm not doing that again. He was quiet for a moment, the sound of rain filling the space between us. Then he exhaled, slow and steady. You don't have to need me, he said. His voice was calm, but there was something underneath. A tremor, maybe. Just don't lie to yourself about wanting someone to stay. That stopped me cold. The rain outside intensified, slapping against the glass, drowning out the soft jazz still playing through the speaker. I swallowed hard. It's not that simple. It never is, he said. But pretending it is doesn't make it easier. I turned away, trying to hide the mess of emotions fighting in my chest. Guilt, longing, fear. something dangerously close to love. I wanted to tell him that he'd become the only quiet thing in my head, the only person who didn't demand that I earn peace. But saying it out loud felt like stepping into the storm barefoot. I don't know who I am when I'm not trying to survive someone else, I whispered. I need to figure that out before I can be around anyone. Even you. Evan nodded slowly, the muscles in his jaw tightening. That's fair. We stood there for a long time, the storm raging outside, both of us framed in the faint glow of the cafe's closed sign. The silence was thick but not cruel, like two people standing on opposite sides of the same truth. Evan broke it first. I'll miss you around here, he said quietly. I met his eyes. I haven't even left yet. He smiled small, tired. I know. The words hung between us, heavy as the rain. I could see it in his face, the flicker of hurt he tried to hide, the restraint of someone who's learned not to hold too tightly to things that don't belong to him. My throat burned. I don't want this to end badly. It doesn't have to, he said. I took a step closer, close enough to feel the warmth of his body, the faint smell of soap and coffee that had come to mean home. He looked at me, eyes soft but guarded, waiting to see which direction the moment would take. It was one of those fragile pauses that could turn into anything, confession, kiss, or goodbye. I could feel it, the air between us charged, the faint tremor in my fingers as I brushed a raindrop from his sleeve. He didn't move, didn't flinch. Luca, he murmured, my name sounding almost like a question. I met his gaze, deep brown, full of quiet patience, and for a second, I wanted to close the space between us, to let myself fall into the thing I'd been fighting. But the fear rose faster, the fear of losing him, of becoming dependent, of ruining the one good thing I'd found. So I stepped back. His expression didn't change, but I saw the flicker of understanding in his eyes, and something else. Acceptance. He nodded once, almost imperceptibly. Take the umbrella, he said softly. You'll need it. By the time I reached the door, the storm had softened into steady rain, the kind that blurs everything into silver streaks. I turned once more. He was still standing behind the counter, watching quietly, hands in his pockets. I wanted to say thank you or goodbye, or something meaningful enough to hold the weight of what we'd built. But the words refused to come. Instead, I opened the umbrella, the same one from that first night, and stepped into the rain. The air was cool, the city half asleep. Water soaked the edges of my shoes, and thunder murmured far away. Every few steps, I looked up, as if expecting the sky to answer something I hadn't asked. Didn't. But for the first time, I understood what Evan meant. I didn't have to need him. I just had to be honest enough to want someone like him, and brave enough to learn who I was without him for a while. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to walk for a bit, alone this time, not because I'd been left, but because I'd chosen to. Behind me, the cafe light flickered once and went dark. Ahead, the rain fell in long silver threads, and I kept walking until the streetlights blurred, the umbrella trembling slightly in my grip, the same way my heart did. The world moved on. That's what it does, quietly, efficiently, without asking if you're ready. 3 weeks had passed since I left the cafe. The first few mornings felt almost peaceful. Sunlight through unfamiliar curtains, the smell of laundry detergent on new sheets, the kind of quiet that pretends to be freedom. I'd found a small studio apartment a few blocks away. Cheap, a little drafty, but mine. I got a job at a bookstore that paid just enough to keep the lights on and the fridge humming. It should have felt like progress. And yet, every evening, I caught myself glancing toward the window, half expecting to hear the clink of cups, the low hum of Evan's voice, or the gentle jazz that always played in his cafe long after customers had left. But the sounds never came. The silence of my new life was clean but empty. I'd tell myself it was better this way. That space meant growth, that I needed to prove I could stand alone. And during the day, I almost believed it. I smiled at customers, alphabetized novels, learned the exact sound the doorbell made when someone walked in. But at night, when the city dimmed, I'd catch my reflection in the window, a faint outline, holding a cup of instant coffee that never tasted right, and realize how much of myself still lingered in that small cafe, behind the counter, next to him. I started writing again, not letters to him but thoughts to myself. Little fragments I'd jot in a notebook before bed. He didn't fix me, I wrote one night. He just sat with me while I was broken and showed me that it wasn't the end of the world. Another night. Maybe what hurts most isn't that I miss him. It's that he made me remember what being cared for feels like. I tried not to reread those pages, but I always did. Sometimes I walked past the cafe after work. The sign, Rowan's Cafe, still flickered softly in the evening light. I'd slow down near the window, pretending to check my phone, though really I was just looking inside. Most nights, I caught a glimpse of him, wiping tables, locking the register, flipping the closed sign. A couple of times, he looked up at the window like he felt someone watching, and I'd turn quickly, pretending I was just another passerby. I told myself I'd go in eventually, just for coffee, nothing more. But I never did. Not yet. The rain returned on a Thursday. It came without warning. A sudden downpour that sent people scrambling for cover, umbrellas blooming like flowers across the sidewalks. I stood outside the bookstore, watching. For the first time, I didn't reach for the umbrella hanging from my bag. His umbrella, the one he'd pressed into my hands that night I left. I carried it everywhere, unopened. But that day I left it closed. The rain was cold, almost sharp, but it felt honest. It reminded me of that first night, of how everything had fallen apart and, somehow, begun again in the same breath. I walked home through it, letting it soak through my hair and clothes, my heartbeat syncing with the rhythm of the drops. For once, I wasn't running from it. I wasn't afraid of what it meant to feel exposed. Halfway there, I stopped. I realized where my feet had taken me. The cafe stood across the street, its lights dim but still on. The windows glowed a soft amber, like a lantern in the storm. A small sign in the window read closed, but through the glass, I could see a figure sitting at one of the tables. Evan, book in hand, reading glasses perched low on his nose. A cup beside him, steam curling slowly upward. Something in me ached. Not painfully, but deeply. Before I could talk myself out of it, I crossed the street. My shoes splashed through puddles. Rain ran down my sleeves. I tried the door, locked, of course. But when I knocked lightly, he looked up. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then he stood, surprised but calm, and came to the door. The soft jingle of the bell hit me like nostalgia. He unlocked it and stepped aside, eyes warm but cautious. "You'll catch your death out there," he said. His tone was gentle, familiar. "I forgot how to use an umbrella," I said, managing a shaky smile. He let out a quiet laugh, that same sound that used to make the morning softer. "Some habits come back on their own." I stepped inside. The cafe smelled exactly as I remembered. Coffee, sugar, faint traces of rain and cinnamon. The warmth wrapped around me like an old blanket. "I didn't think you'd come back," he said after a moment. "I didn't think I would either," I admitted. "But here I am." He nodded toward the chair across from his. "Sit." I did. The wood creaked under me, familiar. For a moment it felt like nothing had changed. The same table, same flicker of light, same hum of the fridge behind the counter. But we had. I could feel it in the quiet between us. Steadier, more deliberate now. He closed his book, marking the page with a napkin. "You look better," he said. "I feel quieter," I said. "Not fixed, but less afraid." "That's something." "It is," I agreed. The silence stretched again, but it wasn't empty this time. We both had words waiting behind our lips, testing if it was safe to let them out. Finally, I said, "I used to think you were saving me, but I see it now you weren't." He looked at me curiously. "No," I shook my head. "You just gave me space to stop pretending. You made it okay to feel everything I'd been running from. That night, you didn't fix anything, you just stayed. And that was enough." Evan's expression softened. Pride, relief, something almost like love flickering there. He nodded slowly. "That night," he said quietly, "I wasn't trying to save you. I just didn't want you to think you were alone." The words hit me like the first breath after drowning. For a long moment, neither of us moved. The rain outside softened into a steady rhythm, each drop sliding down the window pane like a heartbeat. I reached across the table without thinking, my hand brushing his. He didn't pull away. His fingers were warm, rough from years of work, steady as always. The kind of touch that didn't ask for anything. "I missed this," I said softly. He smiled. Not wide, not showy, just enough to reach his eyes. So did I. There wasn't a grand declaration, no dramatic kiss or apology. Just the quiet acknowledgement of two people who'd both been lonely, finding their way back without losing what they'd learned apart. Outside, the streetlights shimmered through the rain. Inside, the cafe felt smaller than I remembered, or maybe it was just closer. When I finally stood to leave, Evan didn't stop me. He just pressed the umbrella into my hand again, though the storm had nearly passed. "Keep it," he said, smiling faintly. "You might still need it." I looked at it, then at him. "Maybe I won't." He chuckled. "Maybe not." As I stepped outside, the rain slowed to a drizzle. I didn't open the umbrella. I let it hang loosely at my side, my fingers still warm from where his hand had been. The street glistened under the lights, the air cool and clean. And for the first time in a long time, the quiet didn't feel empty. Felt like peace. The rain came back in spring. Not the violent kind that tears through streets and drowns the sound of your thoughts, but the soft kind. A steady whisper that settles into everything it touches. By then, months had passed since I'd walked back into the cafe that night. Things didn't rush forward after that. There were no confessions under the rain, no hurried apologies or grand gestures. Just small things, morning texts, casual coffee visits, shared silences that slowly became part of our rhythm again. Evan and I didn't talk about what we were. We didn't need to. Whatever label would have fit felt too small for what it had grown into. Something calm, steady, built from patience and trust instead of fear. He still ran the cafe. I still worked at the bookstore. Some evenings, when the shop closed early, I'd cross the street and find him there, wiping tables or refilling jars. He'd always look up, that same quiet smile tugging at the corner of his mouth, and say, "You're just in time, tea's still warm." And somehow, every time I started spending more nights there again. Not because I needed a place to stay, but because it felt like home in a way my apartment never quite managed. Sometimes I'd read by the counter while he did inventory. Both of us caught in that comfortable hush that only exists between people who no longer need to fill the air with words. He'd hum occasionally, soft and low, usually when he thought I wasn't listening. The same tune as before, off-key, familiar, grounding. One night, I looked up from my book and said, "You do that when you're happy, you know?" He blinked. "Do what?" "Hum." He laughed. That soft, easy laugh that had pulled me out of darker places before. "Guess I'm out of practice at hiding it." I smiled. "Don't." He didn't. Our routines wove together like threads. On Sundays, we'd cook at his place upstairs. Nothing fancy, just eggs, toast, and whatever vegetables hadn't gone bad yet. He'd insist on doing the chopping because, in his words, "You have the knife confidence of a frightened squirrel." We'd argue over seasoning, laugh at burnt toast, share quiet moments when words ran out but the warmth didn't. There were no declarations, no cinematic moments. Just simple gestures that meant more than I ever expected. His hand brushing my shoulder as he passed behind me. My mug waiting on the counter in the morning with the right amount of sugar. His laugh cutting through the sound of the rain outside. I began to realize that love didn't have to arrive with thunder. Sometimes it showed up as a chair pulled out for you at breakfast. As silence that didn't demand explanation. As someone remembering how you take your coffee. One evening, after closing, the rain started again. The first soft drizzle of the season. Evan was counting the till while I wiped down tables. "You ever notice," I said, "how it always rains when something important happens?" He looked up. "Like what?" "Like when we met. Or when I left. Or when I came back." He leaned against the counter, thoughtful. "Maybe it's the weather's way of keeping us honest." I chuckled. "That's poetic." "Don't tell anyone," he said. pretending to be embarrassed. I've got a reputation to maintain. The cafe lights reflected in the windows, soft gold against the glass streaked with water. The world outside looked blurred, dreamlike. He tilted his head toward the door. "Walk with me." I hesitated. "In this. It's only rain," he said, grabbing 2 coats. The street was quiet. The rain came down in a fine mist, gentle and cool, the kind that lingers on skin but never soaks. We walked side by side, not rushing anywhere. Our shoes splashed lightly through puddles, the smell of wet asphalt rising like a memory. For a while, neither of us spoke. I just listened, to the rain, to his footsteps, to the rhythm of our breathing falling in sync. I glanced at him. The way the light caught on his profile, the faint lines near his eyes from years of laughter and worry. There was something grounding about being next to him like this, like the world could be chaos and still, here, it made sense. "You still scared of storms?" he asked softly, as if reading my thoughts. "Not anymore," I said. "Not since that night." He nodded. "Good." We stopped under a street lamp where the light pooled around us like a halo. The rain shimmered in it, small silver threads catching the glow. I looked up at the sky, letting the drops fall against my face, and laughed quietly. "You know what's strange? I used to think rain meant endings, like the universe was washing things away. Now it just feels like a beginning." Evan smiled. "It's both, I think. Depends what you're ready for." I turned to him. "And what about you? What are you ready for?" He met my eyes, steady, patient, the same as that first night. "Whatever comes next," he said. Something in the way he said it, without fear, without hesitation, settled deep inside me. I reached for his hand, slow, unsure if it was too much or too late. But he didn't flinch. He just intertwined his fingers with mine, like it was the most natural thing in the world. The warmth of his hand against mine was familiar now. Steady, solid, alive. Later, back inside the cafe, we hung our wet coats by the door. The rain continued outside, tapping softly against the windows. Evan poured tea while I flipped through the book he'd left open on the counter. He joined me, leaning close enough that our shoulders brushed. "I never thanked you," I said after a while. "For what?" "For that first night. For staying." He smiled faintly. "You don't have to thank me for that." "Still," I said, "you changed everything." He shook his head gently. "You did that. I just handed you a dry towel." I laughed, but there was truth in his modesty. He'd never tried to save me. He'd just given me the room to start saving myself. We stood there, side by side, watching the rain streak down the glass. It wasn't dramatic or passionate, just peaceful. 2 people who'd found each other in the middle of life's noise and decided to stay. Months ago, I would have been afraid of this stillness, afraid it meant something was missing. But now I understood. This was love. Not the burning kind, but the steady flame that keeps you warm long after the fire dies down. As we sat together, the sound of rain filled the room. I thought about how far I'd come from that first night, how much quieter the ache inside me had become. He didn't promise forever. He never did. He just stayed until I stopped crying. And somehow that was enough to start living again. Later, as we closed up, he turned off the lights, leaving only the faint glow of the street lamp outside. I reached for his hand again, not to hold him back, but to hold him close. Outside, the rain continued, steady, rhythmic, cleansing. We stood by the window, our reflection faint against the glass. The world beyond blurred into silver and light. His thumb brushed against my knuckles. I smiled. The rain wasn't something to hide from anymore. It was part of the story. Not the storm that broke me, but the one that washed me clean. And as it fell softly over the city, over the cafe, over the 2 of us standing quietly inside, I realized something simple and certain. I wasn't afraid of the rain anymore, because this time I wasn't standing in it alone.